Hey, everybody. Welcome to the WordPress Friday Hangout. It's Friday. We're hanging out and we're talking about WordPress, right, Victor?
Talking about WordPress every day, all day.
WordPress every day. We're talking about leveling up in WordPress, where you're at now and where you want to be. How do we get there? What are some options? What are some opportunities, some resources, some tips, some advice on how we can level up ourselves, level up our companies, level up just the work that we do? There's a lot of different things you can do in WordPress. And there's a lot of different ways you could do that. It could be a very easy process, a very simple drag and drop stuff, no code, all the way up to very advanced, very custom coded applications around WordPress. So it's a pretty wide range of areas that you could jump into, and certainly areas that you can level up in. So if you're tuning in today, I'm assuming you're interested in leveling up, and we have some fun guests on today. Why don't we go around the horn a little bit, give everyone a chance to introduce themselves, tell us what you do, how you're involved with WordPress, and then we'll kind of kick it off from there. Courtney, you want to start us off?
Sure. So I think my lag finally just cleared itself. Oh my goodness. We've had the technical difficulties this morning. So I am Courtney Robertson. I'm a developer advocate at GoDaddy Pro. My very brief version of my history was a former school teacher, have worked at the events calendar doing support and release communications for marketing purposes, managing the knowledge base and things. I also taught WordPress in high school and host high school boot camp settings. And I contribute to the WordPress training team these days, along with a few other teams in the project. I get to do a lot of work on learn.wordpress.org, and I'm really excited about the flow of learning WordPress through getting the jobs. I help moderate the jobs board too on jobs.wordpress.net.
Seems like you like WordPress. Just saying.
Might be very serious about WordPress.
Might be.
Awesome. Well, appreciate that, Courtney. And David, why don't you tell everyone who you are, what you do in the WordPress space?
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name's Dave Ryan. I'm a senior product manager here at Bluehost. And I get to work on a bunch of WordPress experiences here at Bluehost, particularly around blocks and some of the new things happening in WordPress. My very brief history is that I went to journalism school. I dropped out of journalism school. I started working at a content site called Fansided. I built a bunch of WordPress-based code at Fansided. I eventually started working on some other brands and properties. I worked on the core CMS team at Time Inc. We built lots of content publishing APIs. And then I went big in a different way. Instead of working on sites with millions of hits, I went to work on a million or a few more sites here at Bluehost. So, and I've held a few different hats here. So a few engineering roles, and now I'm working in product.
Awesome. I think we got some really good guests on today. What do you think, Victor?
Yeah, definitely. It's like everyone here has like really good journeys, and again, like started from scratch, different places. So it's very cool.
Yeah. Now we have GoDaddy and Bluehost here. So do we just let them fight? Do we just get out of the way and see what happens?
I know. We should have gotten some kind of video game set up in here, like make GoDaddy versus.
We're not actually talking about leveling up. Tell us why your host is better. No, I'm kidding.
The secret is we really like each other.
I know. Well, that's the great thing about the WordPress community, right? As well, yes, there's competitors obviously in this space. At the end of the day, we're all friendly, we're all friends, we're all part of the community, and ultimately we're passionate because we like open source and we like WordPress and want to help each other. So I think it's, even though there is very good competition, and healthy competition is good, right? I feel I've never quite seen it this way in other areas and other communities of the friendliness, I guess, between competitors in a way. So love to see it. I think it just speaks to our community and what we're doing here. So let's dive in. Leveling up WordPress. Again, it's a pretty big topic. It's a pretty wide topic. So I guess the question is, where do we want to start? Who wants to kind of dive in?
We can jump off where you just said it. Like, hey, there's a great community here, right? And one of the things that has been, struggling, and I think we should be sharing more about it and getting more people involved, meetups. That's how I got started. My story is, I think now 10, 12 years, I was working in the nightclub industry. We paid for a website. They didn't do exactly what I want. I didn't know how to communicate. Hey, can we get a custom 404 template? I didn't know that, right? So I go to the WPNYC meetup. I meet Steve Bruner, right? And I have a problem where when people say things that I don't agree with, I feel like I have to correct them. And so I started volunteering to speak. And so to kind of share my thoughts on things. And from that just was continually meeting people, continually communicating, continually sharing. and, like, and giving as much as you take, right? Because I was volunteering. I actually was giving more, and then, making sure help desk. But that, I think WordPress, like you said, is very rare. Even yesterday, I was sitting down at the bar, and this guy who was my neighbor, his son always says hi to my dog. And he said, "Hey, I always see you like talking to people. Like, are you like a mentor?" I told him who I am. And he goes, "Look, I'm a pediatrician, but I'm getting really stressed by like the I guess the day-to-day work of like, with whatever." And I told him the same thing. I was like, go to, there's health tech meetups. And I feel like you could go and be like, "Hey, I'm looking to change industries." There's tech companies, biotech, and they're probably like, "Oh, hey, we need someone to run clinical trials and studies." Like, communities are a big way to, broaden your skill set and upskill your career too.
Yeah, I think back to when I learned WordPress originally, I needed a blog while I was teaching for my students to know what their assignments should be. And so I found a couple different things in open source, and then one thing led to another, and I found WordPress, and I haven't looked back since. A couple of years later, I found that there was a WordCamp happening it was WordCamp Mid-Atlantic. And Brad, I think you might have been there with me in 2009.
That was my first WordCamp, actually, 2009
Yeah.
Mid-Atlantic, and my first WordCamp and my first time speaking at a WordCamp.
Yeah.
Don't ask me what I
those.
presented on.
No, but I think I remember you sitting like in front of me. This is just weird. So anyway,
I do have the same haircut, so
yeah, it doesn't change
Timeless.
a lot. I'm not sure that I could pull that haircut off, but I went to that and I didn't know anybody. And the very first entrance into the WordPress community, going to an event, is I can volunteer because I forgot to get my ticket in time and I want to get in. So I messaged Aaron Brazel and said, "Do you have a way that I can get in still?" And he said, "We need people to check people in at the door." Suddenly, everybody thought that I knew everybody because I was checking people in at the door, and I knew nobody, and I didn't know what I was getting into that day. But now I do know a lot of WordPressers, and the power of your network. Not only are you going to have people that you can ask the skills of, I don't know how to do this thing in WordPress. Can you help me with that? Our happiness bars at camps are back, which was great. But also the jobs board can be posted there. You might see a marker board around. You're starting to get to meet the people in the industry that either can solve your problem or can point you to others that can solve your problem. And that's something that I think is really powerful. And so while you might feel going into a camp, I don't know how to network, I'm not great with people, I'm an introvert and these extroverts aren't letting me talk, find your space, make some space for others to join that conversation, but leverage the power of networking within the WordPress community, because most of us don't bite and we really like welcoming others in.
Most of us. Yeah, I love the tip about volunteering. And I guess you kind of fell backwards into it in a way with needing a ticket, but I think there's a good lesson to be learned here, because we had on the podcast at WordCamp Phoenix, Kurt Von Annen, and he works with Lifter, LMS, and some others. But he actually told me this story, similar situation, where he seemed like a pretty outgoing guy, but what he said is, he's like, if I just go to an event and I don't know anybody, he's like, it's very hard for me to like get conversations going, introduce myself. He just would walk around a few times and say, "Yeah, maybe this isn't that great of an event," and would leave. But what he found that worked for him is by volunteering and by having a specific job duty to do at an event, that immediately let him break out of his shell, because he had a job to do. And usually he liked to be at the check-in, because you got to meet everybody, help them out, get them checked in, answer any questions. And I thought he was the most extroverted guy talking to everybody. And he's like, no, I kind of have to force myself by being a volunteer to do that. So like he recognized that challenge he had, which was getting into conversations and talking to people, and the fix for him was to volunteer, because it kind of forces you to talk to people, just like you said. So I love that. I love that approach and that advice.
I actually don't mind. I will say, for speaking, that's why I try to apply and get the speaking gig, because like I sometimes will like buy a ticket for like $15 and I'm like, oh, I have to drive an hour to get there, or like 2 hours to get there. And I've done that sometimes, or I bought a ticket for WordCamp and I'm like, it's raining, and I'm just like, I don't feel like going, like driving in the rain or getting a car. And then like, knowing I'm like, oh yeah, people are counting on me, and having people message me and be like, "Hey dude, can't wait to see your thing." I'm like, oh, I better get in that car and go. Can't let people down. And I've never actually skipped, I think, a single speaking gig, like, because it kind of like makes it feel like, okay, this is something I don't mind doing. And then I meet people just hanging out, and it's great.
I think one of the really interesting things is all of our stories are so different, but there's so many common threads in them. I was sitting in a coffee shop with someone and I looked over at their screen, and it's not uncommon to see WordPress, but this was a developer and she was working on WordPress multi-site, and that is less common. And I was like, oh, I'm also working on multi-site. And we got to chatting and she said, we do like 4 or 5 meetups a month. Like, have you ever come to one? And I said, no, like they're a little further out. Like, I don't have a car right now. And so I would like take a bus like 3 hours up from school. And then like she would give me a ride home after the meetups. And then I organized a WordCamp before I ever attended one. They just, they needed some help. And I said, I can build a website. So, I worked on a site there, and I've since organized 6, 7 WordCamps, built the site for WordCamp US this past year. So when you're generous, I think you can be really surprised how much you can benefit. And so when you just give freely and share what you have, whatever that is, everyone is, an expert in something or capable of helping out, and helping run an event, check people in, and you can really learn a lot and, start to build a great network from it.
Yeah, the local meetups are a great place to start. And when I first moved out to the East Coast, I moved out to New Jersey, on the kind of in the shore area, so not near any really large city, more by the shore. And there was no New Jersey meetup group anywhere, so we actually started one. And it really was just a handful of us. We didn't expect many people in that area, but there'd be 4 or 5 of us, every month. And it was fun because we were all kind of learning together. It's kind of a little more intimate. It's just a handful of us, and it was basically just us learning together. When I moved to Philly a few years later, I started a Philadelphia meetup group because there wasn't one, surprisingly. And that's blossomed into one of the largest, WordPress meetup groups in the US. And again, they're still going. It's virtual, which is a great way to dip your toe in if you're a little bit apprehensive about going to an in-person event, or just doing that is getting out of your comfort zone. Go to the virtual ones. You can sit there with your camera off and just kind of get a sense of how these things go. Like Philadelphia meetup is still going. It's virtual. Anybody can attend it. You don't have to be in Philly, obviously, since it's virtual. So it's a good way to kind of feel these things out and see if you maybe want to go attend some live in-person ones. But if there isn't a meetup group, maybe consider starting your own. Even if it's just going to be a handful of people, you will learn and you will grow that way, and you'll grow together.
Yeah, and I'll say this is about leveling up we're kind of like, we've been on like leveling up your network. And, when people hear leveling up, they also want to skill up, right? And I think that's a good way with what David just said, which is, hey, I helped build the website. So when we're saying volunteer, when we're saying, get involved, the community, that's the networking part, right? And if you're trying to, and some people might say, and I get a lot of coders are like, no community, they want to be that coder in the basement who just gets pizza shoved under the door or something. But like, that's not real, right? Like you need a network, but to skill up. And that's where you then, if you want to get technical chops, you do have to start to discern what meetups you go to, what events you're going to, like, going to ones like, I know I have a reputation for like enterprise talks, right? And then there's people like Richard Tabor. He always has great, like design and like thought processes talks. And like, there's certain, I think it's like, Laura does all these great content talks. And so like knowing what you're trying to learn, and that's kind of thinking about that, and targeting that. And so if there's opportunities, and that's like, when I have mentees, right, that want, or even people like at companies, like I work at a company right now, and, I had a person, she was trying to learn analytics, and she's like, well, my mom has like a Shopify site. And I said, okay, here's a guide on installing Google Analytics on Shopify for your mom's like flower site, right? And now when she came back to work, she felt confident about like, about talking about analytics, talking about e-commerce, and like attribution modeling in Google and whatever analytics system. And so that's too, like if you get an opportunity at these events, use the networking, talk to people and say, hey, does a church need a website? Does a school need a website? How can I help? Can I get involved? And you can skill. So these events, that's the network angle. And then you turn that into your technical skill angle.
Related to that, I think about those early WordCamps where I went and I was able to figure out installing WordPress and using WordPress pretty easily. What stumped me, though I was teaching HTML and CSS, was PHP. Like I got started when Revolution Theme by Brian Gardner was the hot new thing, and you had to manually register a sidebar. And so suddenly I had to learn what's PHP and what do I do with that? And I took on projects that were harder than I actually knew what to do with. And I learned a lot in that process. I didn't charge while I was, I was teaching full time. And as a side project, I'm learning how to register a sidebar and add widgets before we had that ease of use in WordPress. But that idea of also, if you are in a learning mode and you're going to a camp, go to the talks that are harder than what you can currently understand, because the more that you hear it, the more you're familiar with the terms, the more that it will slowly kind of make sense. Also, you kind of figure out who's in the room that you could feel comfortable asking questions to. And then likewise, push yourself beyond just WordPress in terms of learning. You know, when I'm digging into PHP, JavaScript, I'm not looking at what's the WordPress variety of those things. How does WordPress use those? I'm first going to those sources and learning, what do I do with this? If I'm in a dev learning mode, I need to go outside of the WordPress bubble to learn some of those skills and then figure out how inside of WordPress we compile all of that together. And last night I shared on Twitter, oh yeah, it's been a while since I've used Composer. Here I am making sure Composer's installed and updated on this project. I've moved into a role. So formerly my last role, I was teaching at a boot camp. And I was living in VS Code all day, every day, because I'm teaching coding. My role as a developer advocate now is a little different. I have meetings internally to say, hey, our customers are saying this, or meetings with our contributors from GoDaddy to the WordPress project and hearing with that. So you could tell that my coding time is reduced a little bit. I need to make it a priority to be in learning mode and take on projects. I need to continue leveling up, even though I'm now at a more managerial position than I've ever been. Even as a school teacher, it's a little different managing middle schoolers and high schoolers than managing in the workforce. And so I need to make those times for those projects. Well, if you were in my class, it'd be about the same as what I'm, but maybe not. So I need to make those times for continuing to learn more in different areas. React is on my horizon. I haven't gotten into React a lot yet. I need to make time for learning materials, but also things that are harder than where I've been.
Yeah, I think that point of always learning is important, right? We're in technology, so it kind of goes without saying, but I'll say it, like you always have to keep learning, right? Because things are changing, at a lightning pace all the time, so if you're not, doesn't mean you have to be an expert at everything, certainly not, but you at least need to have your eye out on the horizon, see what's potentially coming, see what new technologies or trends are happening. And then as things get a little more solidified, start to figure out if that's something you would want to learn or integrate, maybe for your clients or for yourself. React is a perfect example. That's really, obviously, with the introduction of Gutenberg, has really taken kind of a front seat in a lot of ways with WordPress development. So it's obviously an area that people need to be somewhat familiar with. It doesn't mean you need to be an expert level React developer, but you're probably going to come up against some React code if you're under the, in the code level side of things. So at least start getting familiar with what that means and how you can interact with it. Will only benefit you down the road. So
I'll also add that, like, sometimes this has to be said, especially like right now in the way the economy is, right? And I just want to say this. There's people who don't have a job or are in a job they don't really love and they're scared to move for whatever reason, right? And there are people, and I feel bad for these people. These people who are getting like $750,000 or, to like do research at Google, and now they can't find a similar job because that job was like, a job of that market economy, right? Of like cure. And so you kind of have to like push through and challenge yourself to do projects. So if you're unemployed, right, you don't have the work that you want, it stinks, but you have to challenge yourself to find projects that you can learn from. And so the one thing I'll say, the community makes it great, but also, and that's part of your job hunting, but I'll also say skilling up, like pick the projects that can help you get the job. So if you're like, hey, I need to learn React, okay, go on Upwork, pick up a couple easy React jobs where it's like, go to a meetup and go to a hackathon for React, go to those things. And then when you go to apply or you interview, you can speak about something confidently that was a real intangible thing, right? Because I think a lot of people, they don't treat, and like, I think Brett, like I've spoken about this before, I get frustrated when I meet other developers, engineers, whatever we are now, technologists, product managers, who say, well, like they don't learn outside of, and I meet a lot of people in my job. It's really kind of actually crazy in my big enterprise roles where they're like, well, I thought we would learn on the job. And I'm like, No, it's a trade. The same way, like, a carpenter, I'm assuming, I used to build kitchens, but we would have kitchen magazines, right? In high school, and when people know this, I used to build kitchens, and so custom kitchens. And so we had all these kitchen magazines where we go through, and like my boss would be like, oh, did you see all the new like mounts they got? Oh, check out this hardware. And he would be like, making sure he was up to date on that stuff, right? I feel that also, again, technologist, product manager, social media, whatever you are in this new modern world, you have to kind of keep up with what Brad said. And I know it sounds like, well, that's work. Okay, you kind of have to be a trade person and be like, okay, it's not work. It is part of work, but you have to like, hey, 30 minutes a day, read through some newsletters, listen to a live stream, maybe WP Friday, listen to a podcast, right? And that kind of also is keeping it so you're breathing that. And it also does this thing where you keep hearing this word. Like I kept hearing a word, like everyone, what was like DXP and everyone, all these like CDP, SEO. And you're like, hey, okay, I get what they keep saying. And then like, it just flies by you. And then your brain does this thing where you're like, one day Google it. And then now every time you hear it and then they say SEO again, you're like, oh my God, that was really smart. Now I know what they actually meant. And that's a good thing. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's just getting in a habit of becoming a trade person. And I don't know if a trade person's the right role, but like you kind of have to, and I'm not saying eat, sleep, drink it. You don't need to like listen to it while in the shower. Like some people are crazy like that, but 30 minutes a day of breathing your trade, I guess,
I think that that's one of the tough things about this industry is it is this commitment to lifelong learning. And, I was at a meetup last night, I started my day at like 3:30 a.m. local, which is a little earlier than I usually do, but I had a meeting with someone else in the company in another part of the world. And, then I'm running a meetup at 7 p.m. I did take a nap in between. My company is nice enough to let me do that. Right. So I think that it's tough, and sometimes it is really tough to will yourself to go out to that meetup, particularly if you aren't speaking. But I think one of the things that meetups help remind me of is that up is a pretty broad direction. There's a lot of different ways you can level up. And I think one of my biggest challenges and faults that I've had to work on overcoming is what does up look like for me right now? And I used to never think like I would work outside a newsroom. I thought that I always wanted to work in media and publishing. That was the only place I could have the kind of impact I wanted to. It was the only place that I would be happy doing what I was doing. And then I decided that Up actually looked like helping millions of small businesses succeed online. And then I took a pivot out of engineering into product. And I said to my team recently, I used to think that the coolest thing I would do professionally is write code and like put some cool code out in the world. But it's been a lot more gratifying than I ever thought to help them have more impact than I ever did. And, help unlock their time and defend their resources. And, when there's a new release of React and, they're like, oh, we have to go fix the thing that like, I get that. And so helping, defend someone's time and helping them level up and succeed can be just as gratifying as doing it yourself. So if you're struggling, I would definitely recommend broaden your horizon of what Up looks like. It doesn't need to be a bigger company. It doesn't need to be even a bigger contract dollar amount, right? It can just be, what does Up look like for me? I want to break into something new that I haven't done.
That resonates a lot as a school teacher for me. So coming from a teacher's mindset, and my parents were both school teachers, I in fact replaced the lady that supervised my mom's student teaching while teaching at the same school as my father for a number of years. Oh, this is a small world. So as a teacher, I always come from this perspective of helping others to learn things. And I think one of the areas that I've watched a lot of my friends grow through their engineering journeys from junior dev to, principal engineer and what that looks like. And what I notice when they start going for some things like principal is that they are really attuned to. So in the dev world, we have a junior, usually a mid-journey level, and then a senior, and then beyond that's principal. And then you're looking at depends on the company. So as you're working through that career trajectory, even if it's the same career path, maybe you stay even at the same company, your mindset starts shifting from I am the new learner to I can help other people overcome a thing. And that doesn't have to deal with code. That could be in marketing or any number of career fields. But when you start considering that there are other people that are having the struggles that you once had, and you want to help them in their journey. And it doesn't have to be a big commitment. You know, Victor, I know that you mentor other people. I have had some former students that I love to stay in touch with, and some that I'm like, on your way. Thank you very much. But still, it's that idea that we have learned in our journey what we have learned, and we can help inspire other people in their journey, sometimes with a big commitment and sometimes without a huge commitment at all. Just, oh, have you met this person? Maybe you should connect. Right. And so I love that element, Dave, of empowering others.
Well, that's another good way to level up. Okay, that mentoring, right? And not even just mentoring all the time. One of the ways I leveled up on my kind of marketing and strategy and client stuff, and that's also why internally at big companies, I know how to I call it the game of Office Thrones. I know how to horse trade and whatever. And I learned it from the WP Elevation group. Had a lot of good, but it wasn't really, it was funny. WP Elevation wasn't on enterprise. It was more, and now it's Digital Mavericks, I think, Troy Dean and those guys. It was more about client strategy. How do I get them to do this? How do I get them to do that? But then I started thinking in the enterprise level, okay, how do I work in there? But the way I leveled up was people would ask questions like, hey, is this true for SEO? Is this plugin any good? And I had an opinion, and I would debate, a little bit and be like, hey, I really don't like saying it that way. I do it this way, you do it that way. And it was really cool because it lets you know, and again, don't go in there expecting praise, by the way. Just go in there and try to give answers, because you might get some people who are like, you're actually wrong. So thank you for nothing. And you're like, and okay, whatever, fine, man, sorry, I didn't know it was that way, right? But then you get people where I had this dude and was like, oh my God, what? I gave a little demo of how I was using ActiveCampaign to do some kind of triggers with gravity forms. And I learned by making that video, and then I put it on WP Elevation being like, hey guys, can everyone give me feedback? And then this one guy was like, oh my God, always was giving me knowledge bombs. And my wife, it was either just cracking me up. He's like, my wife is like, well, what did Victor from New York say? And it was really cool. This guy from Canada was telling his wife oh yeah, this guy in WP Elevation, this big New York guy, he gives me all this advice. And I was like, I forget that sometimes you can also become a brand. And so people want to learn from you. And so challenge yourself to share cool stuff, and anyway, on a Facebook chat, on Twitter, again, people can be mean. So, whatever. But yeah, and just get out there and that's a way to learn, and if you're doing a project, share it. And people will be like, oh, that's cool, I did this. And then they want to people want to collaborate.
I think one area that's helped me, look at your role, because mentoring, I love that idea, right? Again, we're all in open source. We like to help each other. I firmly believe that's why we're here. One other area is also working with your peers. For me, I have a lot of monthly one-on-ones with other agency owners, and we help each other because we're in unique positions that have to deal with unique issues. And sometimes it's hard to, relate or I guess have healthy conversations with people that aren't in the same position. And I know everyone listening is probably in a different position too, right? But if you're a developer, back end, front end, whatever your strengths are, find other peers that are kind of in the same spot as you and have monthly syncs, have, biweekly chats and say, hey, where are you working on? What are you learning? Oh, I took this interesting course over here, Wes Boss, you should check it out. Oh yeah, I didn't know about that. Let me take a look. Or I did this LinkedIn learning thing, or, oh, I signed up for this virtual meetup. You should join me. It looks like it's going to be pretty interesting around the REST API. You know what I mean? But even just kind of having touch bases and syncs with your peers that are around the same level as you can help grow together and share advice with each other, and more of a one-on-one safe space.
Hey, Brad, can we start a book club for professional WordPress plugin development, 2nd edition?
Hey, that sounds familiar.
You know what's funny? I belong to a machine learning. It's funny you say that. I belong to a machine learning club, a book club. And that's because of I'm in data, I'm less in WordPress and more in big data and architecture and stuff. And that's interesting you say that. There isn't because I think the problem with WordPress sometimes, you said it before, Courtney, you got to go outside WordPress, right? And I think when people say, let's make a WordPress book club, everyone just starts recommending, the same 10 books. And Brad, while I love your book, it's it's all, there's other things to read. And like you said, that's where we need, someone saying, hey, check out this Wes Boss course, check out, I love, what's this guy? He has a name that's Colt Steele or something hardcore on Udemy, but he does this one called Get a Developer Job. And so it's with a GIT. And so it's it's very you need to know GitHub, or how to use Git, you need to know PRs. And it's like, it's less about HTML and whatever. It's more like, here's how you'd coordinate in Jira. Here's how you do that. And like those kind of things that like, that's not WordPress, right? But it is important because I argue that if you don't know Git, like I can't work with you. Like I've had developers who try to send me an FTP file. I'm like, sorry, like pass, you need to know Git. And that's like those kind of courses and book clubs, like you need those.
One area that I know has grown in recent years is page builders, drag and drop, obviously Gutenberg as well, drag and drop. And so there's a very large community within WordPress of, builders and creators that are using, more drag and drop systems. From what I've seen and talked with, there's, and that's great. There's an awesome market for that. They're awesome products. There's people that, can use that, and it's very powerful tools that do that. There's a lot of people that are kind of wanting to kind of say, okay, this is what I do, but how do I take that leap into more advanced development or more advanced custom work, right? And building out themes versus using Beaver Builder, or, actually really digging into Gutenberg and integrating that into the projects. Like, I'm curious if anyone has advice on kind of the page builder group and the people that want to start to kind of level up to the next step of WordPress, site building, which would be more of kind of going the custom theme route versus a page builder.
When I was teaching in a boot camp, our students would learn HTML, CSS native, just very plain basic native. Then we came in with WordPress and they're like, well, why are we learning HTML and CSS? And then when they got through Bootstrap, I introduced them to Beaver Builder because they might take on clients that are page builder clients. They need to understand what page builder clients would be experiencing. And, you learn one, others are going to have their own flavor and be slightly different, but you've got the idea that these are interfaces over top of WordPress. But I pointed out, but Beaver Builder is calling in Bootstrap. And so it's good that you learn Bootstrap first, and also that you understand CSS with, grid and flex and all of our methods, because then you understand why WordPress does things perhaps the way that it does. Hopefully you understand why. And we're starting to see that over in Site Editor with our group and our row and our stack blocks. That's Flex, CSS Flex blocks going on in there. So I would then also take them over and say, let's go look at Beaver Builder's jobs board and see what they're hiring for, because you need it to build Beaver Builder. You need to have these kind of skills. And I got to speak with Robbie about that one actually when we were at WordCamp Phoenix together, which is great. But I think then if you're going to level up from being a page builder, WordPress builder, whether that's a developer, whatever you call yourself to get clients is fine. But when you're ready to go up and maybe you want to scale to enterprise level clients, and that might not be the most performant or custom way to go about it, that might not be the thing for an enterprise company, then I think going back to these basics of, well, let's look at the basics of CSS. Let's look at the basics of JavaScript, of HTML, and how can we do that? And how can we maybe remove the extra layers between? Getting a really solid foundation of actual HTML, CSS, PHP, JavaScript is going to be really powerful. Get that really solid approach under you.
I think one of the really interesting things too is that I think that we used to have this very natural path of you would start working in WordPress, you might start using widgets, and then you might start using the customizer, and then you might start going full Bootstrap or whatever the the framework du jour is, right? And I think now to build a really advanced block theme in WordPress, most block authors who are building some of the best block themes out there are starting them natively in the editor itself. And they're building it and starting and building their framework out there. And then when they take that code and they start copying it into files, that's where they might start sprinkling some of their magic on. But even the people who are at the top of their game in WordPress are often starting in the site editor when they're building something native and new, because they want it to fully work. And it is visual, and it is, quite frankly, faster than trying to write that HTML from scratch. So I think that's a kind of new, interesting development. But I think that the sort of flip side of that coin, one of the things that I think helped me level up the fastest is I was handed really difficult problems to solve, like working in a WordPress multi-site with 250 sites on it, understanding how the primary blog and the other blogs all interact with each other. Like, until you get those sort of big problems to solve, the shall we say weird ones or difficult ones, you don't have to push and stretch yourself. So if you find you're like sort of not leveling up the way that you want, find a project, whether it's like a passion project or an actual client project, that can really sort of help you push and find that skill that you don't have. It pushes you out of your comfort zone. I think that is the best gift I've ever had, is that I had, some junior developer jobs where I had to solve really hard problems, and
like trial
I had to
by
ask
fire.
lots of questions. Yeah.
I
Well,
love
I'll
that. I
also
mean,
say-
all of our
Yeah.
new hires, when they come in, I say the biggest asset and level up growth opportunity at this company are all of your team members, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're working with really brilliant and people that many times are smarter than you, it's going to force you to level up, right? It's like what they say, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, right? Like, I play a lot of chess. If all I was playing with were people that I could, just destroy, it's not leveling me up at all. In fact, it's
Well, so
probably
that's-
leveling me down.
That's the one thing else. So for me, and this is not to like brag, but a lot of the times I'm the smartest person in the room, like, because that's my job. Like, and even when I don't want to be, like, or I'm the person who knows how to find the smarter person, like saying, hey, like, this is my top React engineer, listen to this person, but I can't become the top React engineer. That's what I'm saying, right? So when it comes back to like I work for Sotheby's, but then they let me moonlight, and I have my agency Abstract WP. And so for myself, like, it's like, how do I level up? How do I keep growing my career? Because while I'm doing data architecture work over at Sotheby's, I myself want to still, I don't code at Sotheby's. I've never done a single PR in the 9 months I've been there. All I do is write the JIRA tickets for the engineers, get them, write a grep to say, hey, grep to find all the events in this TypeScript, and then delete and run this test. And here's how you're going to pass. And I, develop the CI/CD architecture. But, heaven forbid I end up like a Googler, and those jobs are no longer needed, right? The CI/CD becomes AI. I still need skills, right? So what I will do is I will find projects, and this is something hard that, like, a lot of people, if the money's coming in, look, if you're making, $5,000 a month, just means, building a couple websites every couple months, it seems like, what do I need to skill up for? I'm just going to keep building these websites. I'm printing money. But the economy and the world keeps changing. So as a solopreneur, I think sometimes people, they get lost in the sauce and forget that, there's like this tidal wave of change coming, right? And so what I say is, like, think about problems in your, and I know it's hard to say for one person, organization, but how you consider your clients part of your organization. If you have 10 clients, and I did this for myself in the last 3 months, I just like been really stressed out with like day job stuff that I had nothing to do. Like, it was very hard to get like my own work done. So my developer needed something to do. So we ended up building like across, we have 5 of our own sites. We have like 5 other client sites that we were building. And I was like, okay, how can I borrow web dev studios, WD underscores, but then use 20 takes patterns? Because what kept happening was we'd get a client and they'd start building with the default patterns in WordPress, and it was just not clicking, or, they didn't have enough patterns to start with. So I did that, and I was like, okay, I'm going to make it so that when I give a client a site, we don't have to do content entry, and it's going to be so effing easy. And I skilled up building, using publish press capabilities with, CPTs, and like making this custom interface with custom, roles, and then mapping them out in a spreadsheet so that we can communicate to the client. And I was like, that was a huge win. And now I'm doing the same thing with our Okta provisioning at Sotheby's. And so it's like, you can learn different, and this is enterprise level stuff, by the way. And I taught myself by doing it for like, hey, I'm going to like use custom roles for my clients and have it uniform. And now I can bring that back. Like managing Okta is like a big, that's big money enterprise stuff right there.
Yeah. What are some, we're kind of rounding the corner here on the show. I'm curious, what are some good online communities, if we're wanting to level up, or if we're wanting to find, our people to hang out with and try to level up with? And I know that's a broad question because it kind of depends, Dave, to your point about what is your up, I think it's an amazing question people need to ask themselves, right? Like, where are you trying to go? You can't figure out how to get there if you don't know where you're trying to go, right? So defining that is good, but what are some good communities, some places people could get out there? We talked about meetups and events that are kind of more local, or maybe even streaming, but like online communities people could join and start getting involved. Anything stand out?
one of the things that came up in our meetup last night was someone raised their hand and they said, I feel like I have all this vocabulary. I just don't know how it applies to WordPress and how to really leverage that. And so we did a meetup last night where we were looking a lot at ChatGPT, and because WordPress is open source and ChatGPT has so much it can sort of learn from and leverage, it's not all accurate. And part of the hard part is knowing when it's accurate and when it's not. But if you have that vocabulary of how do I add a CPT to WordPress? If you've never done it, start asking some of these chatbots and AI tools, because oftentimes they're pulling from really great resources and they can make something really succinct. This person was saying, I've watched all these YouTube videos and some of them are great, but some of them are really long and they kind of meander into something that I don't really need. And I think that if you can learn if you can learn vocabulary, particularly what you don't know, and start asking chatbots those kind of questions, you can start pulling out the content you need to help yourself level up and fill in your gaps. So
I like it. That's definitely newer tech advice with GPT and AI. And I actually you're right. It can actually code. It can do a number of different things. I had a ChatGPT build a basic settings plugin using the settings API to just store an API key just to see. And the first pass, it nailed it. Like, it was great. So yeah, that's a really great tool and a very kind of newer tool for our tool set, right?
I think also there have been online WordPress adjacent communities for learning. Some of I know the LinkedIn Learning courses, they have kind of an element of it that you can start asking questions and other people in the course will answer. Treehouse does similar things. But then in addition to that, a couple of things that I've done to really help me. I joked about Brad's book, but I love that book. I recommended it actually when I was teaching for my students as one of the next extensions of, after they've learned some of the basics, here's your next thing and there are projects in here and get to it. But meeting up with other people that have a similar experience, right? So here's a demo, there's the book, love it. Got it on Kindle version. But I think I had one of your runs of the first edition too. So
Old school.
Yeah, you mailed it to me. I signed up to be one of your early readers. So with that, getting a group together to go through the idea of a book club, even if it's a video-based course, right? You say, okay, we're all going to get to this point by this date that holds you to, we're going to do the thing. And then you find a couple of people, maybe coworkers, or if they're not coworkers, people that are in your same industry, and possibly even nearby that you could meet together with and go over the problems in person with. And another option, I know with the developer advocates in the WordPress space, I've reached out to all of those that are dev advocates and said, hey, here is a Slack community that we keep together inside of Post Status, and we sort of elevate what are the things that we're all commonly facing or seeing. And then I have a group that I get together with every other week for Zoom lunch. We encourage each other, bring food. Half the time we're not talking about actual work stuff. Most of us are former coworkers, not current coworkers, but got pretty close together when we were on a certain team. And so we still routinely get together and we talk about what are the different things that we're experiencing. And out of that, a book recommendation I've had for a lot of people lately was Engineering Management for the Rest of Us. So I read a lot of community management type of books. This isn't community management. It is developer management, I guess you could say, but there's a lot of community elements in it. Your community being your internal coworkers. And so we were talking about one of the people moving on to a different career or a different level within their organization. And I said, this is the book that would really help you set your mind at ease in terms of what you're doing now in a managerial role. So that idea of connecting still with our coworkers, I think was really valuable. You build what the community is that you need. If you don't find a big, massive online community, well, stay in touch with your people and build there.
Also, I'd say any of the vendors that you use, if you use Beaver Builder, join the Facebook group. If you join, and the one thing that drives me, Facebook has become like, it's the worst interface ever. I go in and I can't get I wish they would let me just make like a custom feed with only Facebook groups. Like anyway, but I do recommend getting Facebook groups, go in there and just start going through them. Like I was saying before about the 30 minutes a day, like of like being involved. If you don't want to do podcasts and newsletters, and I prefer podcasts and newsletters to groups anymore, because like Brad was saying, finding people at the same level is harder. I'm at the point now where like in my career, there's not much I can get from those groups anymore. But like Advanced WordPress is a great one, Beaver Builder, but then also the vendors. Beaverworld has one, GoWP has one, all the plugins. I'm sure Bluehost, do you guys have one? Like, I feel like every, like, you know, there's different, okay. But there's different, there's like Bluehost, unofficial, cool group of WordPress people. Like there's like, you know, like, audience end up making them, and then get in there and you're going to meet your peers. And I've gotten business from some of these. Like I've, you know, gone into them, given an answer, and and again, don't go in with that mindset, but you might also find your next like coding partner, someone to learn from, someone to coordinate with, just someone to inspire you. Right. And so that's like, you know, that's my community advice. Go into Facebook, and then not Twitter as much anymore, but also there's Slack groups out there. So Post Status, it is $99 a year, but it is like that. I feel that $99 is like the minimum that gets really good people in there. Brad and I think everyone's in there in this room, right? And like, it's just this really great, it's like, I would say it's like the people who are willing, hey, if you're willing to invest $100, like you're serious about WordPress, right?
Yeah. I mean, if
because
you're if you're a professional in WordPress at any level, you should be in Post Status, right?
Yeah, because you do on Facebook get some people who are like, I'm not paying for any plugins ever because developers are stupid and how dare they expect money. And that's like, and that's like the hard part in the Facebook groups. Once you start skilling up and you feel like respect for your career, you're like, it is really hard to listen to these people sometimes.
Yeah. I guess my suggestion would be think about the best way that you learn and the best way that everyone learns a little bit differently, right? Like I remember I taught myself to build websites, you know, a long time ago, you know, in the 90s really. But when I got into the database stuff, like I learned most of the stuff through message boards and forums, you know, back in the day. That was where we all learned everything, it seemed like. Obviously, they're not as popular as they used to be, but there's a lot of other things out there. So Reddit is a good spot too. There's a couple interesting communities. There's the WordPress community on Reddit, if you're into Reddit. And then years ago, over 10 years actually, I started a pro WordPress subreddit, which is dedicated more to like, you know, more professional advanced development, you know, just the more professional side, not just how do I upload an image type questions. There's that. There's, you know, we mentioned Post Status. There's obviously the WordPress Slack that has pretty much everybody in there as well. Facebook groups, you know, Twitter groups, like there's just so many opportunities. But I think that if we really summarize everything that we talked about here today, you know, it really seems like the number one resource to help people level up is the community, right? It's the people, and it's finding the right people that you want to be around to help you level up, that can share resources and share advice and share knowledge. That is the challenge that you need to find for what you're looking to do and where your up is. But you know, it's the people. We're all helping each other learn. I learned a lot of WordPress development through IRC back when all of WordPress was, you know, being coordinated in IRC, and I just learned by asking questions and people helped me. And then at some point it flipped and I started answering more questions than I was asking, and the next thing I know, I'm writing a book. So, you know, things just happen so very quick, like you know, so put yourself out there, figure out, you know, what your comfort level is, where you want to go. There's definitely ways you can kind of dip your toe in, and there's ways you can jump in head first. You know, there's a lot of opportunities out there, and especially as more in-person events are starting to show up, even more opportunities are going to present themselves. So this is a very, very welcoming community. It's the reason we all love it and we're passionate about it. So, you know, get yourself out there, find your group, you know, and level up. We all want to level up. So with that, let's real quick, we'll go around, just shout out where everyone can find you online if they want to follow up, and we'll go from there. Courtney, where are you at online? You still on Twitter?
I am on all the networks. So you can find me at Courtney R_dev on any place that allows an underscore. GitHub doesn't, so there's a dash there instead, but
they ruined it. Cool. What about you, Dave?
I'm Dave Ryan. The D is a 0 in all the places. I think one of the biggest challenges is that I'm not in many of the places these days. I'm trying to be healthy and pull back from these places. And I would love to see what the next iteration of, shall we say, WordPress Twitter is, because I think that was, again, a really great resource for me. So
yeah, hopefully something's coming. We'll see how that all shakes out in a few months or a year from now. Who knows? But Victor, where can people find you besides the tuna bar?
Just Google Victor Ramirez WordPress and you can find me, or at isvictorious.com, or isvictorious with 2 X's on Twitter and on Instagram. So
Awesome. Well, I'm Brad Williams, Williams BA on Twitter. Pretty much Williams BA anywhere. You can find me. Thanks for joining the WordPress Friday Hangout. We're back next week, 10 a.m. Eastern, hashtag WP Friday. Yeah, follow us if you have questions, thoughts, ideas, topics, put them on the hashtag. We'll check them out and bring them on. And then at the end of the month, we'll be having our open show, so anyone can hop on and talk anything they want about WordPress. So thanks for joining, Dave, Courtney, Victor. Really appreciate it. Great conversation today, and have a great and safe weekend, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Thank you all.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Have a great weekend.
Later.